Welcome back to the World Chess Championship between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Ding Liren. We have now arrived at game 8. The players have played already 7 games against each other and Jan Nepomniachtchi is ahead 1 point. Now Ding Liren is taking the white pieces today, so it will be on him to prove if he can win with the white pieces and perhaps level the score. Let's take a look what happened in today's game because it was simply incredible. So many things happened. You thought that the first 7 games were dramatic. You have not seen this one. Let's take a look. So Ding started today with move d4, knight f6, c4, e6, simple opening, and here we are in the Nimzo Indian. So here e3 is played, short castle, and now white is playing a3 to challenge that bishop on b4. Now of course the idea of the Nimzo Indian defense is that black is capturing this knight on c3, giving up the bishop pair, but damaging white's pawn structure. As you can see, this pawn structure is not looking so great, but of course the pair of bishops can be really nice for white. d6 is played here, knight e2, c5, this is all very standard. The knight maneuvered to g3, knight c6, and here Ding played a very odd move, rook a2. The last time I remembered when learning chess, I have to develop my pieces, my minor pieces, which are the bishops and the knights. And since my bishops have not been developed yet, I think it would be time to do that and then castle. But Ding is neglecting all of this and simply going for a move like rook a2. Let's see what he has in mind. b6 was played, e4, bishop a6, bishop g5, h6. So here also challenging that bishop. What is it going to do now? And instead of moving that bishop, Ding played the move h4, a very typical move where there is so much pressure happening on the h-file that if black takes on g5, which actually happened in the game, there's a lot of issues happening here for black. Now, if you move the knight back to safety like knight e8, you will face problems like queen h5, and suddenly there's a checkmate threat, and it's really hard to defend this. It's actually impossible to defend because if you move, for example, the pawn up to bring the king out, then g6 and you can resign already. So that's why the knight did not move. Black played instead the move g6, so stopping any sort of queen infiltration on the h-file. So this was the moment that Ding took the piece back that he just sacrificed. Queen takes f6, and here we are back to a normal position. But usually capturing a piece on g5 can be very dangerous, so you have to be really careful there. And most of the times it does result in such positions where you give back the piece simply, and you're fine. So e5 was played, d takes e5, and instead of taking back on e5, white is going for d5, trying to create a passed pawn, and not just a passed pawn, but a protected one, because, so knight e7 was played. In case of takes, you can always follow up with c4, and it's really hard to challenge this pawn on d5. Instead, now d6 was played, knight f5, knight e4, attacking the queen on f6, queen d8, the queen doesn't really have many squares available, so queen d3, king g7. The queen, of course, is trying to maneuver around, trying to see where it can infiltrate because it's not doing much on d1. So g4 was played here, attacking the knight, bishop b7, which was a brilliant move because, well, as you can see, the knight was under attack. Black decided not to move it because obviously if you move the knight back to h6, for example, or knight h4, there are always issues on the h-file. Let's take a look. So if knight h4 would have been played, which would be a logical move, you simply face the move g5. It makes sense that you consider queen h3, but after queen h3, there are moves such as g5, shutting down a lot of the attacks on the king side. So that's why instead of queen h3 first, you play g5. And by that, you're also blocking the queen on this diagonal. You're shutting down the queen and the position altogether because your next move is knight f6, rook h7, and that seems like game over. So that's why knight h4 was not played and instead bishop b7, which was an amazing move played by Jan Nepomniachtchi because it seems like you can simply capture this knight, of course, but if you take this knight over here, then e takes f5, and it gets really shaky because this knight is pinned. It's under attack, so white is definitely losing the knight over here. And on top of that, this pawn becomes a huge weakness. It becomes really difficult to see how you can actually defend this. So that's perfect reason why this move is so strong, and that's why you don't take on f5 just yet. Rook h3 was instead played, getting out of that pin, knight h4, and now g5. So as I said before, shutting down the queen and attacking the knight on h4. And here was the moment that Jan made a huge mistake. Bishop takes e4, which seems very logical considering the fact that this knight was going to jump to f6, and it seems like a lot of trouble on the king side. But it was not a good idea simply because there are still lots of issues in the position. Even with the knight off the board, it is still very difficult for black to play here. So knight goes back to f5, rook d2, simply defending that pawn on d6. Now you may be thinking, I can simply capture this pawn on d6, but if you do that, then you allow queen takes e5, which is a check, attacking the knight, and you will simply lose the knight. So you can't capture this pawn on d6. So rook h8 wasn't played instead. Of course, makes a lot of sense since there's a lot of pressure on this h-file. So if you're able to trade some pieces off, it will make your life much easier. So rook takes h8, queen takes, and now d7. And Ding is simply pushing this pawn because this pawn has a lot of potential. Rook d8, stopping the pawn, of course. Queen takes e5 check, king h7. And here we see Ding repeating the moves a few times because, as you can already guess, the players were a bit low on the clock. And since they have no increment in this phase of the game, they have to play really quickly until move 40. And as you can already see, Ding saved quite some moves with this because this way he is getting to move 40 even quicker, and he will need to make less moves to get there. So queen c7 was now played, which is a really good move. Queen h4. Jan is simply giving up the rook. Obviously, if your opponent gives up the rook out of nowhere, there must be something behind the idea. It was in this position that Ding decided to not capture the rook, and he simply lost all advantage he had. Now, the reason why Ding did not take this rook on d8 was simply because it looks rather scary. Queen e4 check, but let me show you how Ding could have won this position had he taken the rook on d8. So here rook a2, simply defending the check, queen b1 check, king d2 is forced, queen b2 check, king goes up because if you go down, you just face repetition, queen b1 check, and now you have to play rook c2. Of course, if you go back to d2, you face another repetition, so rook c2. And this is what looks very scary, because you're not only allowing queen d1 check, but you also allow the bishop to be captured with check. And if there's something we dislike in chess, is when our opponents are capturing our pieces with check. So let me show you both lines. So let's first off start with queen d1 check. Now if queen d1 check, king goes to e4. It is not going anywhere else. We are not playing rook d2 simply because there's queen b1 check and so on. You have to play king e4 here, simply marching up with the king. Queen takes c2 check, bishop d3. Knight d6 check because black doesn't really have other checks available. King e5, insanity. Queen takes d3, queen f6 check because now we have the time to give a check. We're not in check anymore. And after king h7, we promote. But this is not it. Knight takes c4, another check. King f4. It still looks really scary. e5 check. It doesn't end. King g4, queen e4 check. And here, king g3. And after all of those checks, it is finally that in this position, white is winning. There are no more checks unless you want to trade queens, which is not very ideal for black. And this is game over for black. So that's just insanity. Ding had to calculate all of this, and it just makes perfect sense that he would not calculate all of this, or that he just finds it way too dangerous, because you're taking a lot of risk here. And you're also sort of trusting your very strong opponent that he knows what's going on. He has calculated all of this, perhaps. Anyways, let me show you the other line where what would have happened after rook c2, where black to take the bishop. Queen takes f1. So here you simply go back to d2 because there's not a lot of checks left. Queen takes f2, the only check. King c1. Queen e1, and then your king just runs to b2 and you're completely safe. And of course, the next idea is to play queen f6 check and then promote. So this is absolutely fine for white. And had Ding calculated all of that, he would have been able to win this position. But instead, he went for the move King D1, stepping out of any sort of check on E4. But unfortunately for Ding, this was not enough because now Black gets to capture the pawn on G5. And look who is defended, the Rook on D8. And how can you actually break through here with White? Really difficult to see. King C2, Queen E7, Bishop G2. Trying to find a way to infiltrate in Black's position again, but there's not a lot of pawns left anymore. So it seems like Black has a really easy time defending this. E5 was played, Bishop E4, Knight H6. And here White is taking the pawns on the queen side, but here comes the knight. And after Bishop F3, we see another brilliant move, Knight takes F2. Where did this move even come from? Jan Nepo plays another brilliant move after Rook takes F2, E4, and look at those pawns over here. I am more concerned about those pawns of Black than this sad pawn on D7, let me tell you that. Rook E2, pinning the pawn on E4, F5, simply defending the pawn. And now it was move 40. Ding was spending a lot of time over here, and with exactly 4 seconds on the clock, he made his 14th move. Queen takes B6. We were all so nervous in this situation. Is he going to flag? Is he freezing? What is going on? And finally he made this move. But what was even scarier was the fact that he doesn't really have a good position anymore. Despite the fact that he has a bishop and Black doesn't, but Black has really strong pawns and it's really hard facing them. Ding has to play really well over here to even save the game. Now, Jan played his 14th move, Rook takes D7. Both players got time added to their clock, an hour to be precise. And here, Jan slipped slightly as Queen takes C7 would have been the better move, since you're not only stepping out of that pin on the E file, because now the bishop is under attack, you're also allowing yourself to play moves like Queen D3 and Queen D1. And I would feel very nervous here with the white pieces. It should probably still be holdable for White, as you can always sacrifice on E4 to take some pawns off the board, sacrifice a piece for them. But it looks very dangerous and scary. But okay, Jan played the move Rook takes D7, Queen B8, Queen D6, the players traded off the queens, Bishop takes E4 happened, and it was in this position that the players agreed to a draw. This game was madness. It was absolutely insane how Ding had such a great position with very big chances. Jan took the risk, sacrificed his Rook, and was actually able to convince Ding that taking the Rook was a terrible idea. So Ding ended up not taking this Rook, and all of a sudden it was Ding who had to fight for the draw. All in all, today's game was simply incredible. There was so much fire happening, so much excitement. The bar was going up and down all the time. Every single move mattered, and all of a sudden it turned into a very peaceful draw. If you made it this far, let me know down below in the comments and let me know what your predictions are for the next games. Do you think Jan is going to win this championship no matter what? Or do you think Ding still has it in him to come back and fight for the World Championship title? Let's find out in the next video.